Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News this week, President Trump was seen making the rounds with the troops on the ground in the District of Columbia while he continues to mull over his options on rescheduling. His pocket prohibitionists want them to shut down D.C. dispensaries that are too close to schools, while the Project 2025 Heritage Foundation urges no rescheduling. Trump's MAGA influencers weigh in on rescheduling, and that is further dividing his own supporters. We'll get reaction on the possibility of rescheduling with an exclusive with Paul Armentano, the Deputy Director of NORML.
From the beginning of this process, that to have the federal government recognize that cannabis possesses therapeutic value, it's a big deal.
The Supreme Court extends a deadline for the group of cannabis operators who are suing the DOJ over the illegality of cannabis. Their argument is a constitutional one that could bring an end to prohibition. And the Texas Senate has once again voted for a complete hemp ban, something the governor already vetoed once. So now that bill goes to the House for some regulation changes as the bitter feud between Governor Abbott and Lieutenant Governor Patrick heats up. Kerry Hinkle has an update.
Michigan just dropped a bomb on the legal cannabis industry. And if you've been buying legal weed here, you need to hear this.
Amy Carter has more on the close of a testing lab in Michigan. All that and international reports on Cannabis Coast to Coast News next. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast News for this week. And no, do not adjust your set. Alaina Pinto is off this week. I'm executive producer Jimmy Young, filling in, and I'll try to do the best I can. This is WPCM TV's weekly report documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. But I'm not alone here in Massachusetts.
I'm Karen Black in Arizona.
I'm Curtis Emery in Massachusetts.
I am Kimmie Cannabis in Oklahoma.
I'm Dave Barton in London, England.
Our top story this week is still focused on President Trump's first public comments on the rescheduling of cannabis from last week. Now, while that was our lead story last week, this week we've got reactions from his inner circle and outer circle about those comments, from talking about the rescheduling of cannabis moving from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 of the CSA. We start with the Daily Wire's Matt Walsh, who claimed in a social media post that no country of potheads has ever thrived or ever achieved anything at all. Every city that legalized it became an even bigger shithole, basically overnight, unquote. And then he said, the entire history of Western civilization tells us that marijuana is far, far worse for society, he said, claiming that our society thrived when everyone was smoking cigarettes and drinking whiskey. Huh? Really? Where'd you get that information? Two products that can kill you make society better? Hey, Matt Walsh, you got any science to back that up? Where in the world did you do your research? Watching Reefer Madness again? Another comment from a so-called Trump insider, Alex Brusiewicz, who agrees with podcast superstar Joe Rogan, who calls the fact that cannabis is still on Schedule 1 absurd, and then shared, Schedule 3 still keeps it as a crime, but it would allow for medical research. Most veterans I know support this as well. Roger Stone is a longtime confidant of the president, and he told Marijuana Moment, quote, while I support descheduling entirely, along with some reasonable regulation, I think rescheduling cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 is a step in the right direction, and it would solve a lot of issues surrounding banking for companies legally selling medicinal marijuana, unquote. This week, I had a chance to talk with Paul Armentano, the Deputy Director of NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, about some of the misconceptions about how rescheduling to Schedule 3 just might work. So taking it off Schedule 1 and moving it to Schedule 3 is a great symbol of at least the government realizes that they didn't classify it properly. Is that a good way to look at this?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. Look, I've said from the beginning of this process that to have the federal government recognize that cannabis possesses therapeutic value, it's a big deal. Mm-hmm. You know, you and I have been doing this sort of work a long time, and it wasn't that long ago that not only did the federal government not recognize cannabis's therapeutic value. It actually threatened to prosecute physicians who dared to discuss the fact that cannabis had therapeutic value with their patients. So to have the federal government go from that position that was so hostile to this issue to finally recognizing what the majority of the public and frankly the majority of doctors and scientists have known for quite some time, that cannabis in fact is a legitimate therapeutic agent, I think is a really big deal. And beyond that symbolism, it is possible that recognition could have some tangible benefits potentially to patients. For instance, right now, VA physicians are not permitted to issue medical cannabis recommendations, not because cannabis isn't FDA approved, but because cannabis is Schedule 1. So it's possible that that policy could change with a change in cannabis's scheduling. Right now, there are several states where if someone's injured in the workplace and they use cannabis to help recuperate from that injury, they are not able to be reimbursed for those costs because their workmen's compensation plans won't cover them. When those policies have been challenged and the courts have held that patients can't be reimbursed, the court's logic is because cannabis is Schedule 1. Again, not because it's not FDA approved, but because it's in this specific schedule. Again, we could see those sort of changes in policy happen just by rescheduling. It's not going to address the much broader, larger picture, but I do think that the benefits do go beyond just strictly symbolic.
And that alone is enough. And then if you're in the industry and you're running a company that has minimal margins, which because of all the compliance and the regulations that everybody in this industry that is a plant touching part of the industry has to deal with, at least you could get rid of that vile 280E clause in your taxes and actually write off those basic business expenses that every other business in America has the right to do as a business, but they've withheld it from the cannabis community for a number of reasons. And in other words, that would be a great win for the industry because of how tight everybody is right now.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is we see some political opponents of rescheduling acting as if this would hand some sort of gift to the cannabis industry, when, as you just explained, this isn't a gift at all. Right now, the industry is facing a tax burden that no other industry faces, and that makes it very hard for them to do business. Rescheduling with regard to taxation on the industry simply levels the playing field. It doesn't give them some sort of new advantage, but it does take away an existing disadvantage that the industry has faced.
The rest of that interview will be released in our special 1v1 report on Thursdays. If you want to read the rest of Paul's amazing piece explaining the challenges of the changes if it and when it goes to Schedule 3, it's available on the NORML website. Let's start our reports with one of our own co-anchors today, Karen Black.
The battle over hemp is heating up again in Texas. This past week, the Senate, led by staunch prohibitionist Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, passed a total ban on hemp products for the second time. Just last month, Governor Greg Abbott vetoed a similar measure and called a special session urging lawmakers to send him a regulatory framework for the industry rather than an outright ban. Abbott maintains he wants tighter oversight, not full prohibition. Now, the Senate's proposed ban heads to the Texas House, where debate over the future hemp in the Lone Star State is sure to continue. With more on this ongoing fight, here's Kerry Hinkle.
This is Kerry Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp out of Houston, Texas, and I am back again with another hemp report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This week, right before Labor Day, we stay in our home state of Texas as the drama and saga of the Texas legislature continues. As we reported last week, the Democrats had fled the state amid redistricting problems and battles on those issues, and yet they are now back in the legislature and we are seeing bills fly through. In particular, surprise to no one, the Senate has yet again passed the ban bill. This time it is SB 6, and it now awaits for the Public Health Committee to take that up on the House side. And one small nuance in the debate of this issue in the legislature this time is that Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and Senator Rick Perry, who carries the bill on the Senate side, did an undercover sting where they went to some seedy smoke shops and vape shops and bought some high THC products that claimed to be hemp. And in one of the videos, the secret shopper mentioned that he had never tried these products before, but he wanted to go straight for the wax. And the retail worker remarked, like, the wax, you're going to die, as kind of hyperbole, and that we all know that the wax is a little stronger than some of the other products or form factors in this industry. And so, but the politicians that have been pushing this ban, in fact, decided to use that hyperbole and that comment to say, look, these products are actually killing people. And so, a little comical, to be honest, that they're taking this offhand remark from a worker at the retail level and suggesting that we should ban the whole category based off of it. But not too surprised, just given where these folks stand on this issue. And so, again, now we wait to see where the House moves on this. Our understanding is that they do not have the same appetite to ban our industry, thanks in part to the support from Governor Abbott. But until the bills are heard, until we see replacements of committee substitute bills that might have some sort of regulatory framework, we are on pins and needles in the state of Texas as we wait for the fate of our industry to be decided in hopefully the next few weeks. So again, I am Kerry Hinkle with Bayou City Hemp, and I will be back again with another report next week.
A few weeks ago, we reported on the administrative mistake that the New York Office of Cannabis Management made on approving dispensary operations that were too close to schools. Now the legislature is doing the right thing for these legal, licensed operators. They're allowing them to remain in their current locations since they were officially approved by the OCM. In Massachusetts, another sign that even multi-state operators are struggling, Tilt Holdings closed up their operations in the Bay State, cut their losses, and got out. With more from Massachusetts, here's Curtis Emery.
I'm Curtis Emery, a bud tender from Resonate in Worcester, Massachusetts, with the Bay State Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. A continuing story here out of Massachusetts, Assured Labs, the independent testing laboratory which was forced to close its doors this summer by the state, is now reopening. Assured Labs will start business again at the start of September of this year after settling up with regulators to the tune of $300,000. Regulators also insisted that the CEO of the company not be allowed to take that position again until 12 months after reopening. Assured then came out and said that they would be transferring the CEO to a different role completely, staying in line with regulators and opening in good faith. Also, in Massachusetts regulatory news, the CCC has come out with a statement in response to the state's harsh audit of the regulatory body last week. The CCC responded to the audit, which called into question many of the practices at the CCC, including discrimination, bad practice with fee enforcement, bad timelines for a variety of different fee enforcements and complaint enforcements and so forth. The CCC claimed that they've been in close contact with regulators, spending over 100 hours with them already, going over areas of concern, finding possible solutions. The CCC, in their response, also said that they are excited to continue the work with the regulatory body to identify new opportunities to help make the CCC run a little better and address concerns that were brought up in the audit and still not addressed internally. I've been Curtis Emery with the Bay State Report, Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
I'm Amy Carter with Michigan Weedsters for this week's Michigan Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The once steep prices of legal cannabis have tumbled across the nation, and it seems Michigan's reputation for cheap cannabis is just part of the much bigger trend. Since 2020, a green surplus has led to a remarkable drop in prices from coast to coast. Industry reports show that while the Mitten State has seen prices fall from around $420 to a mere $84 an ounce, other states are also enjoying a significant markdown. The reason behind the fire sale is simple. Cultivators have produced far more cannabis than consumers can possibly purchase. As a result, the market is flooded with product, forcing dispensaries to slash prices to move their inventory. Good for consumers, not good for businesses. We have some feel-good news coming out of Grand Traverse County, where they're making it rain with cash from cannabis. The county is reportedly allocating a cool $500,000 in marijuana tax revenue directly back into the community. That's right, local service groups and nonprofits can apply for grants up to $100,000 to help with their good work. This all comes after the county raked in nearly $1 million from cannabis sales last year, contributing to the nearly $100 million collected statewide. It just goes to show you that everyone can benefit from a little green. It's been a week to celebrate in Michigan's cannabis market as a major testing lab has been ordered to shut its doors for good. This is Stacy with more.
Michigan just dropped a bomb on the legal cannabis industry. And if you've been buying legal weed here, you need to hear this. For years, Viridis Labs was the biggest cannabis testing company in the state. However, they were caught inflating THC numbers and ignoring contaminants like mold and aspergillus. Translation? They made bad weed look safe and potent when it wasn't. What this is called is basically pay-to-pass testing. If you paid Viridis, that your product would pass magically. If you didn't, well, there were definitely other ways around it, but that's for another video. In 2021, the state issued a $229 million recall. It was the biggest cannabis recall in the state's history. Viridis fought back in court for years, almost about 5 years at this point. But as of August 20th, 2025, the CRA finally shut them down for good. Their lab located in Lansing? Revoked. The lab in Bay City? Closing next month. And the owners? All three have been banned for participating in the cannabis industry in the state of Michigan from here on out.
I'm Amy Carter with Michigan Weedsters for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The state of California's anti-cannabis task group had quite the month of July. Over a 3-week period between July 17th and August 7th, law enforcement agencies combined efforts to bust 5 illegal distribution centers, 2 delivery operations, and 10 dispensaries. The total coming out to about $30 million, and if you are keeping track, that adds up to about 19,324 pounds of flour, as well as 6,100 pounds of vape cartridges. The cities targeted, well, they line up like a Rand McNally list of the top cities in California, including towns like Burbank, Glendale, Long Beach, North Hollywood, Los Angeles, and 3 others. Also seized were 5,585 pounds of edibles, $1.2 million in cash, and 17 gold bars. What exactly were these illegal operators going to do with the gold bars? Now, I understand that gold never loses its value, but I got to say, I think this is great evidence to prove that banking regulations need to be changed in the industry, and for legal operators only. Now, let's check in with Kimmie Cannabis over in Oklahoma.
I am Kimmie Cannabis with Can I Talk About It with the Oklahoma Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Our first story comes out of Edmond, Oklahoma, where tragedy struck at the Cush House Dispensary. An employee, 24-year-old Taylor Jackson, lost her life Friday morning in what police have confirmed was domestic related. The suspect, identified as the father of her children, was taken into custody without incident. Our hearts and deepest sympathies go out to her children, family, and loved ones during this incredibly difficult time. In other news, police chiefs across the states are once again pushing reefer madness rhetoric in opposition to State Question 837. They're warning it will bring more crime and fuel the black market. But here are the facts. SQ 837 does not allow for more grows, and it does not allow for more dispensaries. What it does is create safe, regulated access for adults over 21, taking money out of the black market and putting it into a system of oversight and taxation. Oklahoma Bureau of Narcotics Director Donnie Anderson even went as far as to say, even if they are operating legally, we will drive them out of business. Comments like these have only strengthened the resolve of advocates who are now more determined than ever to collect signatures and get adult use cannabis on the 2026 ballot. That's it for the Oklahoma Cannabis Report. I'm Kimmie Cannabis from Canna Talk About It, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Peace, love, and all that good stuff.
Well, that'll do it for the first section, or A block, of Cannabis Coast to Coast News, but don't go anywhere. We'll go over and across the pond, bypassing Hurricane Erin along the way, and check in on Europe with Ben Stevens, the UK with Dave Barton. Our international report is coming up next, with Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this break.
Your cannabis business could be overpaying by hundreds of thousands of dollars in federal income taxes because of one simple assumption that you're making about your accountant. A dispensary owner in Colorado called me frustrated as hell. He'd been working with the same accountant for 3 years. His accountant said, "What's 471C?" Here's what the ignorance of that accountant was costing this business owner: $180,000 every single year for 3 years. 471C has been around since 2017. We're talking about an 8-year-old tax provision that many cannabis CPAs don't fully understand. 471C is one of the most complex and highly debated tax strategies in the cannabis industry. If you want to make sure you're not leaving any money on the table, I'm offering free 471C reviews this month. Link in the description.
Accounting Buds has grown into Buds Group, the same award-winning quality, now with more service offerings. Buds Group, your best buds in the biz.
Looking for PR that over-delivers on expectations? At Maverick Public Relations, they pair big agency experience with personalized attention. From launching award-winning brands to securing top-tier media hits, their data-driven communications team helps visionary leaders and entrepreneurs rise above the media noise. Maverick PR is responsive, collaborative, and relentless about results and ROI. Visit themaverickpr.com and make headlines together.
If you want to make history, if you want to be part of history, if you want to say you helped legalize marijuana in America, now is the time to join us.
Welcome back to Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Jimmy Young. This is the B block, or second section of our weekly roundup of cannabis news in the ongoing fight for normalization of the plant medicine that we call cannabis sativa. Over the past few weeks, we've shared the story of High Tide's acquisition of a controlling stake in a German medical cannabis company. Plus, in Italy, Tilray is partnering with Maltini, a pharmaceutical company that specializes in pain reduction and substance abuse initiatives in order to expand access to cannabis extracts in that country. Doug Miller has more on Tilray later in the B block. Plus, we shared that Turkey has legalized low THC products and made them available only in pharmacies. Slovenia also moved forward with medical cannabis reforms and instituted a separate movement for adult use. With more from the changes in the cannabis laws for the entire European Union, here's the editor of the Business of Cannabis, Ben Stevens.
I'm Ben Stevens, the editor of Business of Cannabis, with this week's news from Europe for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The European Commission is preparing a major shake-up of hemp regulation, a move that could transform how the plant is recognised, traded and even subsidised across the EU. From 2027, the entire hemp plant, including flowers, leaves and extracts, could be formally recognised as an agricultural product, not just the seeds and stems as it is right now. That shift would give farmers far greater access to the EU's €55 billion a year common agricultural policy subsidies, which account for more than a third of the entire EU budget. There's also a push to raise the THC threshold from the current 0.3% to 0.5%, a move backed by Parliament's Agricultural Committee to protect farmers whose crops often exceed the strict limit through no fault of their own due to global warming. Industry voices say this is long overdue. One long-time hemp entrepreneur told us that for years the debate is the flower part of the plant or not? Now we're saying it is, and that changes the conversation. If this goes through, they added, European farmers will now be treated like anyone growing olives or oranges. They'll be able to apply for grants and subsidies in the same way. However, there's a catch. These proposals must still navigate the EU's lengthy legislative process. Some governments remain opposed to higher THC caps, like Italy, and enforcement on the ground could prove tricky, particularly when distinguishing hemp from high THC cannabis. Still, for Europe's hemp industry, this is being seen as a significant step towards clarity, stability, and legitimacy in a sector that has long struggled with fragmented rules. That's all from me this week. I'm Ben Stevens, the editor of Business of Cannabis, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
I'm Dave Barton from Thermador with your UK Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The personal details of over 4,000 UK medical cannabis patients have been posted online in what's being called a monumental privacy leak. Those affected are said to be exclusively those patients represented by UK Medical Cannabis Clinic CB1. The alarm was raised on August 16th by MedBud Wiki, a trusted UK independent patient information resource, who took to social media platform X to inform followers that they'd been made aware of the leak via Reddit, and that a 2,600-page PDF document containing such information as patients' contact details, dates of birth, and prescription information had been published on a file hosting website. Senior representatives from CB1 confirmed the data breach on August 18th, stating that all affected patients had been contacted, and said that the CB1 team were deeply sorry. While investigations are ongoing, patients are being advised to be overly vigilant of possible scam activity in coming weeks. That's all for this week's UK report. I'm Dave Barton from Thermador, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
If you follow the battle to end cannabis prohibition, you learn quite a bit about how our government works, or maybe why it doesn't work so well. In Michigan, our correspondent Amy Carter has been trying to change some of the laws that regulate that state's cannabis industry. She's been involved in trying to get Jaden's law passed, which would allow school nurses to administer prescribed cannabinoid medicine to students during the school day. So what is a congressional resolution in the federal government? Well, it's basically an opinion of a member of Congress regarding an issue they're passionate about. A congresswoman from Massachusetts entered her resolution this week about legalizing cannabis on moral grounds. Her name is Ayanna Pressley, and she is no stranger to speaking her mind. This week, Ms. Pressley entered a resolution about legalizing cannabis based on social justice. As you might already know, Black people are busted 4.5 times more often than white people, even though both races use the plant medicine in the same percentages. Presley's resolution explains how incarceration is a crisis that has destabilized the lives of millions of families and disproportionately harmed Black and Latino communities. House Resolution 660 calls for the legalization of cannabis and a broader decarceration strategy to reduce prison populations. This resolution will now be directed to the House Judiciary Committee. At least now we know how Representative Pressley feels about the injustice of the failed war on drugs. Now let's check in on Virginia with Joe Parsons.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection by Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WB and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. With all the talk going on about the president rescheduling cannabis to Schedule 3, I get asked all the time what my true feelings are about whether the move is a good idea or should we leave it where it currently stands and continue to fight for descheduling through congressional means. For me, it's a difficult question to answer. I can accept on one hand that the move would be a monumental step forward for medical research, easing cannabis-related stigma, and to help the tax burdens that many in the industry face every day. However, I feel it could also open other doors that would add to the plethora of problems already in the industry, such as being able to grow at home for states like mine that allow it, the future of having access to flower and vape products, and how and if Big Pharma would try to use the FDA to control the entire industry. However, the biggest issue that I have is that moving from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 does not legalize the plant in any way, nor does it help the tens of thousands of people that are in prison or awaiting sentencing for cannabis-only convictions. Case in point, right before the election, President Trump backed Question 3 in Florida that, if it would have passed, would have opened the doors for adult use cannabis in Florida. And Trump went on record saying that no one should be in jail for simple cannabis use. Well, the numbers are in, and immigration and customs data shows that over 600 people have been deported this year for having simple cannabis-only convictions. And the majority of the cannabis convictions, 3 out of 4 in fact, were more than 5 years old and had no other violations. So shouldn't it be logical that if no one should be jailed for simple cannabis-only use, that no one should be deported for cannabis either? Getting Congress to remove cannabis from the CSA altogether should be our ultimate goal, and the only way to prevent these unnecessary convictions and deportations. The only true path to justice is to put the plant on the same level as alcohol and tobacco. In doing research for this report, I reached out to cannabis lawyer and WPCM-TV contributor Tom Howard and asked for his opinion. And wouldn't you know it, he recently did an awesome in-depth deep dive on this very issue. You can check it out by following the QR code that's on your screen. It's thought-provoking and may answer many questions and concerns on the potential move. Well, that's going to do it for this week from Higher Education's Coffee Talk, sponsored by 97.5 3WB in Charlottesville, and reporting for WPCM-TV's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
No matter what business you are in the cannabis industry, it's very difficult to do any kind of banking. Many states have programs that allow debit cards, but for the most part, it's an all-cash industry. Now, Fund Canna is launching ReadyPay, a B2B tool that will allow companies to buy now and pay later. Fund Canna is a specialized financing provider for the cannabis sector, and ReadyPay was designed to help the all-cash transaction industry. For sellers, you will get paid immediately at the point of sale. You will still receive your payments even if the buyer defaults, and you can integrate it with e-commerce sites or use their standalone web app. For buyers, you will receive standard net 30-day payments at no cost. Plus, you will have the option to extend the repayment period with installments up to 6 months. And you can get real-time automated payments in minutes. When you talk about anything involving the business of cannabis, we turn to Doug Miller, who is high on Wall Street.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Tilray Brands, ticker TLRY, has been on fire lately, rallying over 133% in just 3 months after hitting a 52-week low of 35 cents. But this surge isn't just about earnings, it's about the potential game-changing shift in U.S. cannabis policy. It's all about the DEA moving cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3, officially recognizing medical use, and more importantly, killing the infamous 280E tax rule that's been crushing U.S. operators with tax rates as high as 70%. This would flip the industry's financial outlook, unlocking profitability and investment across the board. Why is Tilray exploding? With massive liquidity, a $1.1 billion market cap, and cash reserves up to $250 million, it's become the go-to stock for traders betting on this catalyst. Add in a 17% short interest, and the setup is perfect for volatility and maybe even a short squeeze. Insiders like CEO Erwin Simon are buying up shares, showing they believe it isn't just hype, it's a turning point. Tilray's become the barometer for cannabis reform, and Wall Street is watching every move the DEA makes. So let's see what the stock chart looks like. It's trading around $1.15, and it's curling up and looking good. So watch for any dips, because they're going to be great opportunities. So be sure to trade smart and lock in those profits. And that's this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News, I'm Doug Miller.
A significant legal decision this week is making waves for medical cannabis patients, and the powerful gun lobby is paying close attention. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which covers Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas, ruled that people can't be denied their Second Amendment right to own firearms just because they use medical cannabis. This decision, driven by extensive advocacy from NORML, finds that taking away gun rights solely for medical cannabis use runs counter to the nation's history and tradition of firearm regulation. In a region where support for gun rights is especially strong, this ruling could have far-reaching effects as both cannabis laws and gun policy continue to evolve. Now let's check in with another southern state, Alabama, where Jennifer Boozer Stewart has the latest.
I'm Jennifer Boozer Stewart, reporting from Alabama for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. The Alabama Alcoholic Beverage Control Board, who is set to oversee the rules in HB 445 for the hemp industry in Alabama, has now released their new rules and regulations. And boy, did they muddy the waters even worse. One of the two things that's most glaring is that they're adding the requirement that THC beverages have a child-proof cap on them for safety. It's going to add expense, making the products even more out of reach for Alabamians who, by all accounts, are poor people. If pull tabs are good enough for the alcohol industry, why the extra measures for hemp? Also, in the language about the smokable product ban, which clearly stated as hemp cigarettes, pre-rolls, cigars, and raw plant matter in HB 445, now includes the words anything heated, whether by a flame or battery or other device that creates smoke or a vapor. Now, HB 445 did not include any language whatsoever about the banning or restriction of vapor products, and yet the rules and regulations coming out now are trying to work that in. It's a massive amount of government overreach in an already messed up bill that has devastated hundreds of businesses around the state, including mine, and thousands of Alabamians access, while also creating a Class C felony for possession of smokable hemp. 2 people in Alabama have already been arrested, and the maximum sentence is 10 years. Possession of fentanyl, again, is a Class D felony, and possession of illegal cannabis from the street is still a misdemeanor. We'll have more from this. There's a 45-day public comment period. You can leave a public comment at legal@abc.alabama.gov and let the ABC board know that this is not okay for Alabamians. We are continuing to pursue legislation, and we are continuing to pursue litigation as we fight these rules and regulations that have been laid out for us here. You can find out more information by listening to Sweet Home Cannabama every Monday night on FM Talk 106.5, www.fmtalk1065.com, or our Sweet Home Cannabama YouTube page. Reporting from Alabama, I'm Jennifer Boozer Stewart for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
It was a big week in Minnesota for our new correspondent, Ysha Bellamy. She's affiliated with the Minnesota College of Cannabis, which got a grant this week, and Ysha has some of the details.
I'm Ysha Bellamy for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This is your Minnesota edition, and my heart is just so full of joy for the week that we've had. The Minnesota Cannabis College is something that I've talked about for the last few broadcastings, and we have a podcast called Northern Lights. This week is about the Minnesota Cannabis College. We got to interview Jesse the Body Ventura, along with the first non-tribal dispensary, Lucky Strains. We also have had our minds blown by receiving the Can Train grant, which allows us to give education to many members of our disenfranchised community a leg up in cannabis. Green Equity Summit is something else that we did this week, where we had such an amazing time, so many good connections, and so much hope for the future. And I just cannot wait to see what else happens. We've also got the third place for Green State People's Choice Awards. That was also Minnesota Cannabis College with our Northern Lights podcast. We got third in the nation. So everything's looking really great. And thank you so much to everybody that has been a part of our success. That's all for the Minnesota Report. I'm Alicia Bellamy, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The Second Amendment of the Constitution focuses on the right to bear arms. But since 1968, if you are a registered medical cannabis patient, you've been banned from buying or owning a gun. A decision in the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals in Georgia this week has now wiped that out. The Trump administration had asked the Supreme Court to look into this issue, and now Georgia joins Oklahoma and Texas, which have seen this injustice removed. Nikki Fried, a former Florida Director of Agriculture, had been moving this forward through the courts, and with this decision, Fried said, and I quote, "This is a huge win for freedom. No medical cannabis patient should have to choose between their rights to their medicine or their right to bear arms." End quote.
Well, that'll do it for the B Block, but we have a handful more state reports for you, including a new correspondent from the state of Colorado. Plus, the DEA has petitioned the Health and Human Services Administration to move psilocybin off Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. It's a psychedelic, people, but once again, our government has no clue on any of these plant substances. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this break.
What if we're right? What if all of a sudden they discover that there is medical use for marijuana and that it is good for you and it's better than alcohol and it's better than opioids and it helps your health? What if we're right? What if they find that out?
Specific cannabinoids have medical value. These are facts.
I'm here today in hopes to assist in removing the demonized stigma of cannabis and the perception that cannabis is just about getting high. The true base of this plant has to be known.
I don't think anybody should ever go to jail for cannabis. Get some medicine, and everybody should have access to it.
This is something which, at the very, very least, is the key to alleviating suffering and extending life for millions of human beings. Right? For returning some kind of balance to our society, and quite possibly of restoring our planet's natural balance as well.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the C Block, our final section of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm executive producer Jimmy Young, filling in for Alaina Pinto, who I promise will be back next week. First up, it's Tina Tasaka with the Nevada Report and the latest on the tribal business of cannabis around this country. Here's Tina.
I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. It's been almost 10 years since Nevada legalized recreational marijuana use, sparking a booming new industry. UNLV's Cannabis Policy Institute explored how the cannabis and hemp industry has evolved. A new report just surfaced with these findings August 21st. Nevada's cannabis economy remains one of the strongest in the nation. In 2024, the state generated $829 million in cannabis sales and $120 million in taxes, keeping it in the top 5 U.S. markets behind Oklahoma, Oregon, Michigan, and California. Despite this strength, Planet 13, the world's largest dispensary in Las Vegas, has seen demand cool. According to VP Chris Wren, revenues fell from about $70 million per month 2.5 years ago to around $50 million now, largely due to tourism slowdowns and tighter consumer spending. Still, experts at UNLV's Cannabis Policy Institute emphasize Nevada's unique upside: low production costs, available land, and unmatched tourism potential. If cannabis can be better integrated with hospitality and gaming, Nevada could unlock even greater long-term growth. Wisconsin still lacks a comprehensive medical cannabis program, but tribal sovereignty has enabled indigenous nations like the La Corte O'Reilly Band of Lake Superior Ojibwe to move forward independently. Their university's farm, LCO Ojibwe University, has been cultivating hemp for years and will debut a natural science cannabis science course this fall, exploring its medicinal uses, therapeutic research, history, and legal implications. Under a USDA-approved hemp model, the farm focuses on research, including partnerships with University of Wisconsin-Madison researchers to extract THC-free CBD oil for medical purposes. Meanwhile, the tribe navigates state and federal complexities. In the spirit of Wisconsin tribes, in March of 2025, I reported on the state of the tribe's address in Wisconsin that was delivered on March 18th. One of my favorite reports was the very eloquent speech made by Chairman Thomas Fowler to lawmakers about the dire need for Wisconsin to approve medical marijuana.
Naya's story isn't unique. Overdoses have nearly wiped out a generation of our tribal nation's mothers and fathers. Through the regulation of medical marijuana in the state of Wisconsin, we can work towards moving people off highly addictive drugs which are killing our people. Recent data indicates that in this state of Wisconsin, where cannabis is not legal, there is a 25% reduction in opioid use and overdoses.
That's it for the Nevada Highlights and Tribal Nations. I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
You can file this news item under WTF. The DEA has been using delaying tactics for over a year on the rescheduling of cannabis. But this week they petitioned the HHS to reschedule psilocybin, aka mushrooms. Now, I get that shrooms have this tremendous potential for those who suffer from a variety of mental health issues, but it's a psychedelic and a hallucinogen. It is also on Schedule 1 of the Controlled Substances Act. It's a harder drug than cannabis, yet there's more research and more capital being invested in this substance. The DEA is asking the HHS to move this plant-based medicine to Schedule 3. And when I talked to Paul Armentano last week about rescheduling cannabis, I asked him if it was time to rewrite the entire Controlled Substances Act. But shouldn't that be rewritten at this point, since we know so much more about all of these drugs that are out there?
So the Controlled Substances Act, there's a lot of, I would dare say, confusion about it. You're correct. This was a law passed by Congress in 1970. So at that time, Congress believed in this idea of setting up 5 distinct schedules or classifications for controlled substances. Not for all controlled substances, mind you, but for certain controlled substances. And at the time of the passage of the act, some people don't know this, but cannabis was only meant to be in Schedule 1 as sort of a placeholder. This was sort of a temporary categorization because along with the passage of the CSA by Nixon, language in that same law also established the first and only blue ribbon presidential commission to study cannabis. And that was, in shorthand, that's known as the Schaefer Commission, because the chair of that commission was then governor of Pennsylvania, Raymond Schaefer. And in 1972, the Schaefer Commission came out with its findings, its presidential Blue Ribbon Commission findings on cannabis that said, this shouldn't even be the possession of cannabis, the gifting of cannabis. These are issues that these are activities that shouldn't even be criminalized. So the idea was in 1970, Congress said fairly accurately, we don't really know enough about cannabis to make an assessment of where it should fit in the scheduling, but we are doing this study on it. So we'll put in Schedule 1 for now, and then when the results of the study come out, we'll revisit the issue. Well, they've never revisited the issue all these years later. As you know, Nixon threw the recommendations of his own commission in the trash and said, I don't want to hear about this ever again. And cannabis has been in Schedule 1 ever since, even though it really wasn't the intent, even at the time, to keep cannabis in Schedule 1, because everyone knew even then it didn't fit the criteria of a Schedule 1 controlled substance.
I'm Dave Barton in London, England. We in the UK are always talking about our rainy days, but there are some desert states in the US like Arizona which are going through a difficult drought period right now. And that's affecting the way that cannabis is growing. Here's Karen Black from Arizona talking about what's happening currently in her home state.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. We're in the dog days of summer here in Arizona and in the middle of a stubborn drought. As conditions drag on, talk about how to manage our water is heating up. The latest debate centers on cannabis. Yes, it brings in big tax dollars, but it's also a thirsty crop. With sales slipping in 2025, more Arizonans are asking, is the revenue really worth the water we're giving up? Some growers are rolling out high-tech irrigation and water-wise indoor systems, but with reservoirs still low, the state faces a tough choice: preserve our precious water or bank on a cannabis industry that's feeling the pinch. Arizona continues to crack down on unauthorized cannabis cultivation and sales. After major busts in Phoenix and Flagstaff last month, police in Tempe busted a local shop this week for illegally selling cannabis products. 2 people were arrested and a range of unauthorized THC items were seized. At the same time, another fight is playing out in court over hemp-derived THC products. Attorney General Chris Mays maintains only licensed dispensaries can sell these products, and she is enforcing strict penalties on violators. But the hemp industry is keeping up its court fight, arguing these items are legal under federal law and should be available at shops statewide. All of this comes as Arizona's cannabis industry continues to cool off. In July, adult use sales were estimated at just $71 million, down nearly $14 million from the same month last year, and one of the lowest monthly totals since legalization. Some say stricter enforcement and legal uncertainty are pushing customers back to a resurgent illicit market. Others claim these growing pains are just another chapter as the market matures. One thing is clear: with every part of the industry under scrutiny, the future of Arizona cannabis and how it fits into our desert state's priorities is anything but settled. That's all for this week's Arizona Report. I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Our Washington State correspondent is Matt Friedlander, who is the CEO of Skagit Organics. And to be honest, I had no idea why he used the name Skagit for his company. But now I know it's the county in Washington State where he operates from. Now it makes sense, certainly. This week, there's a story in that area about a so-called cannabis house up for auction. It seems the back history of this house was it's 4 bedrooms, but it was seized by the sheriff's department after the residents there were busted for illegal grows. Despite its status as a licensed legal market, Washington State, they still don't allow growing at home. No home grow? The cannabis house will be up for auction as soon as it can be fixed up a bit. No word on whether Matt is putting in a bid, but he did file his report this week.
I'm Matthew Friedlander with Skagit Organics, coming to you from my hemp garden with the Washington State Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. So we are deep into summer, and that means all the cannabis and hemp plants around the country, especially here in Washington, are starting to flower. You might be able to see behind me that they have definitely grown since earlier this year, and they are starting to produce some buds. So we are excited for the CBD material that we're going to be getting from this in the coming months. On the legislative and regulatory front, the Washington State Liquor and Cannabis Board convened their Washington Cannabis Council for the first time in 5 years. This is supposed to be a place for the LCB to sit and listen to industry leaders and stakeholders and cannabis businesses here in the state. Unfortunately, under new leadership, they continue to close down the ability for people to provide input. There were 70-some people online watching this meeting take place, and they did not allow any online comments. It's part of a pattern we've seen where they have really closed down even verbal public comments at the in-person board meetings of the LCB. So we're going to keep working on that. There's going to be legislation again put forth this coming session to restructure or completely dismantle the LCB. In other news, something interesting happened here in Skagit County. The Skagit County Sheriff's Department is putting up for auction the infamous Mount Vernon Cannabis House. So you can look back through the news and find out the history of this house. But if you've ever wanted to live in an old grow house, the auction's coming up. Now would be your chance to get in on the ground floor, so to speak. So that's what I've got for you this week. Out of Washington State, my name is Matthew, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
A significant legal decision this week is making waves for medical cannabis patients, and the powerful gun lobby is paying close attention. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which covers Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas, ruled that people can't be denied their Second Amendment right to own firearms just because they use medical cannabis. This decision, driven by extensive advocacy from NORML, finds that taking away gun rights solely for medical cannabis use runs counter to the nation's history and tradition of firearm regulation. In a region where support for gun rights is especially strong, this ruling could have far-reaching effects as both cannabis laws and gun policy continue to evolve.
Colorado is one of the most mature cannabis markets in the United States. Since legalization of adult use in 2014, that state has collected over $3 billion in tax revenue. This milestone was passed even though there's been a downturn in sales since the market peaked 4 years ago in Colorado. Those tax revenues are supposed to be directed to school construction, state programs, behavioral health services, and industry regulations. Our regular Colorado correspondent, Xavier Jallet, is taking some well-deserved time off, but before he left, he introduced me to Jenny Germano of ICS Consulting, a role she has been in for 15 years in Colorado. Needless to say, she knows what's going on. Here's her first report, and it's an update on legislative moves in that state. Jenny?
I am Jenny Germano with ICS Consulting. This is the Colorado Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. On August 5th, Colorado's regulators, the Marijuana Enforcement Division, held their first 2025 rulemaking meeting with stakeholders on legislation implementation of House Bill 1209. During the meeting, the MED reviewed the red line draft rules and took public comments from stakeholders regarding the new changes. A few important changes to note in the streamlining bill is employee license badges will only be required for those who handle regulated marijuana, transport, or enters regulated marijuana data into the inventory tracking system on behalf of a regulated business. The House bill also repeals the word physical for the definition of employee badges, which now opens the door for having access to a digital badge, and the Colorado residency requirements for employees have been completely removed. Licensees must present video surveillance records and recordings within a minimum of 72 hours upon request by the MED, as to the previous rule of immediately. Record-keeping requirements have also been streamlined from 35 records needing to be kept and maintained to now a total of 12 records needing to be kept and maintained for licensed operators. The Colorado MED's next rulemaking meeting, number 2, MED proposals and catch-all, will be held September 9th at 1 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, virtually, for those who would like to join the meeting. The anticipated effective date for the implementation of the permanent rules will be January 5th, 2026. I am Jenny Germano with ICS Consulting, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
And finally this week, what about the kids? That's one of the first things prohibitionists like to ask when the question of cannabis reform comes up. A recent study out of New York concludes that cannabis use by under 20-year-olds does not increase in adult use legal states. The research was conducted by Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health. Perhaps the most interesting conclusion of that study was that the researchers found no increase in overuse or cannabis use disorder amongst adults in those legal states. This is consistent with most studies and research over the past decade, proving that somehow education about the plant is reaching the kids, who will always know more about their substance than the adults. I've worked with young people most of my life, and if given the knowledge and the opportunity, young people will always blow you away with their performance and ability. That will do it for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm executive producer Jimmy Young, filling in for Alaina Pinto, who will be back next week. Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Consume it responsibly.
I think I messed up. Did you know there's a place that covers all the cannabis news you need? Pro Cannabis Media is now WPCM TV, your go-to website for things cannabis. WPCM TV is the CNBC of weed, bringing you the latest news you need.
Amy Carter. This week, she reports from inside the State House in Lansing.
I'm Amy Carter from Michigan Weedsters with this week's Michigan Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
And talk shows about all things cannabis.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all you're doing to get the word out. Like, this show is so important.
It all started back in 2018 when Emmy award-winning talk show host Jimmy Young kicked it off with the In the Weeds podcast.
That it's not just any generic paper towel. You do have a brand that you use, right?
Yeah, we live or die by the bounty. I mean...
the quicker picker-upper! I love that!
His mission? Building an army of multimedia journalists and podcast hosts who are documenting the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. Fast forward to today, and we've got the nation's only weekly cannabis coast-to-coast news program with Alaina Pinto.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News, WPCM TV's weekly production of the fight to end cannabis prohibition in this country and around the world. I'm Alaina Pinto.
Delivering the nation's only TV news-style program. Since June 2021, WPCM TV has racked up over 1.3 million views, with 17 million impressions and picked up over 16,000 subscribers on YouTube alone. Now we even have our own app. For more information, contact the team at doublepcmtv.com